the gleaming, sterile world of tech billionaire Jeffrey Pembroke, every problem had a solution that could be bought, coded, or acquired. His portfolio was flawless, his empire unshakable. But inside his Bellevue mansion, overlooking the placid waters of Lake Washington, he was powerless. His 7-year-old son, Leo, lived in a silent, turbulent world of his own, a world Jeffrey's vast fortune couldn't penetrate. Doctors, therapists, and specialists had all failed. Then a new maid arrived, an unassuming woman named Imani Washington, hired to clean the floors he walked on. He would soon discover she held a key, not just to his son's locked world, but to a devastating secret buried in his own past, a secret that would threaten to bring his entire empire crashing down. The Pembroke estate in Bellevue, Washington, wasn't a home. It was a statement. A sprawling monolith of glass, steel, and polished concrete, it jutted out from the Medina coastline like a shard of ice. It was a fortress of wealth, designed for privacy and to showcase power. From his home office, a panoramic sweep of floor-to-ceiling windows gave Jeffrey Pembroke an unbroken view of Lake Washington and the distant Seattle skyline. He could command billion-dollar deals from the leather chair he sat in, shifting global markets with a few keystrokes. He was the architect of a digital empire, a man who understood systems algorithms and the cold, hard logic of numbers. What he did not understand was the small boy in the room down the hall. His son Leo was 7 years old. To the outside world, Leo was the heir to a fortune, a prince, in a modern-day castle. In reality, Leo was a prisoner in his own mind. Diagnosed with severe non-verbal autism, his world was a kaleidoscope of sensory inputs he couldn't process. Some days were quiet, filled with the rhythmic rocking of his small body and the meticulous arranging of his wooden blocks into impossibly perfect lines. Other days were storms of raw, unfiltered emotion that would erupt without warning. Today was a storm day. A high-pitched shriek, thin and sharp as a needle, pierced the cathedral-like silence of the estate. Jeffrey flinched, the numbers on his triple-monitor setup blurring for a second. He squeezed the bridge of his nose, a familiar ache blooming behind his eyes. Another shriek followed this one, morphing into a guttural wail of distress. He rose from his chair, his custom-tailored suit feeling like a straitjacket. He walked down the hall, his expensive Italian shoes making no sound on the polished white marble. The sound grew louder, emanating from the sensory room, a $150,000 venture, equipped with bubble tubes, fiber-optic light sprays, and a water-filled mattress. It had been designed by the best child psychologist in the Pacific Northwest and was, according to the invoice, the pinnacle of therapeutic environments. Right now it looked like a disaster zone. Mrs. Gable, the highly paid nanny with a master's degree in special education, was backed into a corner, her face pale and her hands fluttering uselessly. I don't know what happened, Mr. Pembroke," she stammered. "He was fine, just watching the bubble tube, and then—" Leo was in the center of the room, a tiny whirlwind of misery. He was pulling at his hair with one hand and striking his own head with the other, his small face contorted in a mask of agony. His wails were not words, but pure primal sounds of a nervous system on fire. The cause of the meltdown was a small, overturned cup of water on the floor. The routine had been broken. The predictable order of his world had been breached. "Just handle it, Brenda." Jeffrey said, his voice colder than he intended. He hated this feeling, the utter, infuriating helplessness. He could solve complex logistical network failures, impacting millions of users, but he couldn't solve his own son. "I'm trying, Orte," Mrs. Gable whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Leo, honey, look, it's okay. Let's clean it up." She took a tentative step forward. Leo's shriek intensified, and he threw one of his wooden blocks, It clattered harmlessly against the padded wall, but the message was clear. Geoffrey retreated, closing the door softly behind him. The screams were muffled, but still audible, a constant, harrowing soundtrack to his life. He went back to his office and called the domestic staffing agency, his voice clipped and devoid of emotion. "Brenda Gable is not working out. Her contract is terminated. Send a replacement and find a new cleaner. The last one was unsatisfactory." He didn't care about the details. He just wanted the problems to go away. In the 4 years since his wife Elara had died in that horrific car accident, he had built a fortress around himself and his son. He had hired the best people money could buy to manage his life, his house and his child. But the fortress was failing. The chaos was seeping through the cracks. The next day the agency sent 2 people. The first was another therapist nanny, a man this time named Dr. Peterson, who came armed with a tablet and a new behavioral methodology he was eager to implement. Geoffrey signed the paperwork, barely listening to the man's confident assurances. The second person arrived an hour later through the service entrance. She was a black woman, perhaps in her late 20s, with a calm, steady face and large, observant eyes. She wore a simple, clean uniform and carried a small tote bag. "Mr. Pembroke?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. "I'm Imani Washington, from the agency, for the housekeeping position." Geoffrey gave her a cursory glance. She looked unremarkable. Competent, perhaps. He was used to people being intimidated by him and his home. She seemed composed. "The head of household, Mrs. Davenport, will show you your duties," he said, dismissively, already turning away. "The contract is for a trial period of 2 weeks. My expectations are exacting." "I understand, sir," Imani said, her gaze flickering for just a moment past him, down the long, silent marble hallway. It was a look he couldn't quite decipher. Not pity, not curiosity. Something else. Recognition, almost. But that was impossible. He'd never seen this woman before in his life. He dismissed the thought and returned to the sanctuary of his office, leaving Imani Washington to be absorbed into the quiet, efficient machinery of his household. He had a company to run. He didn't have time for anything else. For 3 days, Imani Washington was a ghost in the Pembroke estate. She moved with a quiet efficiency that bordered on invisibility. The marble floors gleamed, the vast panes of glass were free of a single smudge, and the sterile scent of lemon-scented cleaner was replaced by a subtle, almost unnoticeable fragrance of lavender and chamomile. Geoffrey barely registered her presence, which to him was the mark of a perfect employee. She did her job and stayed out of sight. Dr. Peterson, the new nanny, was far more visible. He spent his days trying to engage Leo with his tablet-based communication matrix. He spoke in a constant, reassuring monotone, narrating his every action. "Now, Leo, we are going to touch the icon for juice. Can you touch the icon, Leo? Good effort?" Leo, for his part, ignored him completely. The boy remained in his own world, rocking, humming a tuneless, repetitive note and stacking his blocks. The storms had subsided, but the silence was just as profound. Geoffrey would watch them on the security monitors from his office, a man talking to a screen and a boy lost in his own universe, inches apart, but light years away. It was another expensive failure in a long line of them. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. A fierce summer squall had rolled in from the Puget Sound, battering the windows with wind and rain. A sudden, deafening crack of thunder shook the house to its foundations. The effect on Leo was instantaneous and catastrophic. A scream tore from his throat, a sound of pure terror. He scrambled backward away from the window, his eyes wide with panic. Dr. Peterson, caught by surprise, rushed toward him. "It's okay, Leo. It's just thunder, "A big noise. We are safe inside." His loud, energetic voice was like gasoline on a fire. Leo's panic escalated into a full-blown meltdown. He began to thrash his limbs, flailing. He knocked over a tall lamp which crashed to the floor, shattering its ceramic base. The new, unexpected noise sent him over the edge. He collapsed into a heap, screaming and striking his ears as if to beat the sound out of his head. Jeffrey burst out of his office, his heart pounding. He saw the scene, the terrified nanny, the shattered lamp his son lost, in an agony he couldn't reach. The familiar, sickening wave of impotence washed over him. "Get back! Give him space!" Jeffrey commanded, his voice tight with adrenaline. Dr. Peterson fumbled with his tablet. "I have a protocol for this de-escalation sequence." But before he could tap a single icon, a calm presence entered the room. It was Imani. She hadn't rushed. She had simply appeared holding a dustpan and brush to clean the broken lamp. She took in the scene with a single sweeping glance, her eyes resting on Leo. "Sir, may I?" She asked, her voice so low it was almost a whisper. It wasn't directed at Jeffrey, but at the chaos itself. Jeffrey, desperate, just nodded. "Do what you want." Dr. Peterson looked scandalized. "Mr. Pembroke, she's the maid. I am a trained professional." "You're a professional who is failing," Jeffrey snapped. "Be quiet." Imani ignored them both. She set down the dustpan and slowly, deliberately knelt on the floor about 10 feet away from Leo. She didn't try to touch him. She didn't speak to him. She just knelt, making herself small and unthreatening. Then she began to hum. It wasn't a recognizable song. It was a simple, gentle melody, a soft, looping lullaby that rose and fell with the rhythm of a slow heartbeat. It was a sound completely at odds with the shrieking storm outside and the emotional tempest in the room. She kept humming, her eyes soft, focused on the distressed child. Slowly, miraculously, a change began. Leo's frantic thrashing lessened. His screams subsided into ragged sobs. He was still crying, but the sharp edge of terror was gone. He peeked through his fingers, his wild eyes fixing on the source of the sound. Imani didn't stop. She just kept humming, the same simple 5-note phrase over and over. It was a sound of pure, unconditional calm. It wasn't demanding anything of him. It was just there, a quiet anchor in his sensory hurricane. After what felt like an eternity, Leo lowered his hands from his ears. His breathing was still hitched and ragged, but he was listening. He crawled a few inches forward, his gaze locked on Imani. She finally spoke, her voice as soft as the humming. It was a big sound, wasn't it? It's gone now. It's all quiet now. She didn't use the patronizing tone of the nannies. She spoke to him as if he understood everything. Leo let out one last, shuddering sob. He crawled another foot closer, then another, until he was just within arm's reach of her. He didn't touch her, but he rested his head on the floor, his body finally still. He closed his eyes and listened to her hum. The room was silent, save for the rain against the glass and the impossibly gentle sound coming from the maid. Jeffrey stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Dr. Peterson looked on his mouth, agape, his expensive tablet hanging forgotten in his hand. In 10 minutes, Imani Washington had accomplished what a legion of specialists with all their degrees and methodologies and 6-figure salaries had failed to do in 4 years. She had reached his son. She had pierced the veil. And Jeffrey Pembroke, a man who believed only in data and tangible results, was left with one burning question: how it wasn't just a technique. It felt deeper, more instinctive. It was as if she knew a secret language only Leo could understand. The sight was a profound relief, but it was also deeply unsettling. A new variable had been introduced into his carefully controlled equation, and he had no idea what it meant. The day after the thunderstorm incident, a palpable shift occurred within the Pembroke estate. The change was centered around Leo. The boy, who usually kept to the periphery of any room, now seemed to gravitate toward wherever Imani was working. If she was dusting the grand living room, Leo would sit quietly in a corner, lining up his blocks. If she was in the kitchen polishing the stainless steel appliances, he would sit at the large island, rocking gently in his chair. He was still silent, but it was a different kind of silence. It was peaceful. Geoffrey fired Dr. Peterson that morning. The man's protests about unorthodox methods and professional boundaries fell on deaf ears. Geoffrey simply paid out his contract and had security escort him from the property. He then approached Mrs. Davenport, the stern, hyper-efficient head of household. "I want Imani Washington to take over as Leo's primary caregiver," Geoffrey stated, expecting resistance. Mrs. Davenport's eyebrows shot up. "Sir, with all due respect, she's a housekeeper. She has no credentials, no formal training in child development, let alone with a child with Leo's specific needs." "She has results." Geoffrey countered his tone, leaving no room for argument. "She calmed him down yesterday when your credentialed professional made it worse. That's the only metric I care about. Double her salary. Inform her of the change in duties. She is to focus solely on Leo. Hire another cleaner." Mrs. Davenport, a woman not easily flustered, simply nodded. "As you wish, Mr. Pembroke." The arrangement began immediately. Imani accepted the new role with the same quiet composure with which she had accepted the cleaning job. There was no visible excitement, no surprise. It was as if she had been expecting it. Her interactions with Leo were a study in patience. She never forced engagement. She created invitations. She would sit on the floor and build a tower of blocks next to his, not touching his, but simply coexisting. She would hum the strange, familiar-sounding lullaby as she moved through the house. The effect was astonishing. Within a week, Leo's meltdowns ceased entirely. He even began to make small, tentative steps toward interaction. One afternoon, Geoffrey watched mesmerized on his security monitor as Imani sat with Leo in the garden. She was methodically pulling petals from a daisy, letting them fall into a small pile. After watching her for several minutes, Leo reached out, took a daisy of his own, and clumsily began to mimic her actions. It was the most profound act of imitation Geoffrey had ever seen from his son. This should have brought him unadulterated joy. And it did on one level. Seeing his son calm, seeing a flicker of connection, was something he had yearned for. But on another deeper level, it deeply disturbed him. Geoffrey was a venture capitalist. He didn't invest in things he didn't understand. He broke down companies to their base components, analyzed their systems, and stress-tested their foundations before risking a single dollar. Imani Washington was an anomaly, a black box. Her success was undeniable, but its source was a complete mystery. Miracles made him nervous. They weren't quantifiable. They couldn't be controlled. His logical mind began to spin, proposing and discarding theories. Was it her voice? Did its specific pitch and cadence have a unique neurological effect on Leo? Was it the lavender scent she seemed to favor a form of aromatherapy? Or was it something more calculated? Was she a charlatan of some kind, a child whisperer who used clever tricks to ingratiate herself for financial gain? The doubling of her salary had been a test in a way, but her reaction, that serene acceptance, offered no clues. His suspicion, a familiar instinct honed in ruthless boardrooms, began to curdle into obsession. He needed to know who she was. Not just the name on a file, but everything. He made a call, not to the staffing agency, but to a man named Finn O'Connell. Finn was not a typical private investigator. He was a discreet, terrifyingly efficient information broker who catered to the ultra-wealthy. He specialized in digital forensics, deep background dives, and uncovering secrets that people thought were buried forever. Finn Jeffrey said, his voice low, "I have a new employee. I need a complete workup. The works." Name. Finn's voice was gravelly professional. Imani Washington, approximately 28 to 30 years old. Reason for inquiry, Finn asked. Corporate espionage, personal threat. Jeffrey hesitated. How could he explain it? She's too good at her job. It sounded absurd. Personal, he finally said. I need to understand her background. Every school she attended, every job she's held, any family, any criminal record, any online presence, however deeply buried. I want to know who I have in my house watching my son. Understood, Jeffrey, Finn replied. I'll start with the standard social and financial sweep. You'll have a preliminary report in 48 hours. Jeffrey hung up the phone, his gaze drifting to the security monitor. On the screen, Imani was sitting with Leo on the plush living room rug. She had a book open, not reading it to him, but simply pointing at the pictures of animals and making their sounds in a soft voice. Leo wasn't looking at the book. He was looking at her face. And for the first time since Alara died, Jeffrey saw the faintest trace of a smile on his son's lips. The sight filled him with a confusing mixture of profound gratitude and deep, gnawing suspicion. Who was Imani Washington? And what was the secret behind the melody that had broken the spell of his son's silence? 48 hours later, an encrypted file appeared in Jeffrey's inbox. The subject line was stark. Preliminary report, I. Washington. He opened it, his stomach tightening with a familiar mix of anticipation and dread, the same feeling he got before a high-stakes corporate takeover. The report from Finn O'Connell was concise, clinical, and deeply unsatisfying. Subject Imani Washington. Age 29. Social Security number issued 5 years ago. Portland, Oregon. Current address, rented apartment, Redmond, WA. Prior addresses, series of short-term rentals in Oregon and Washington, state over the past 5 years. Financials, checking account with a balance of $2,147.38. No credit cards, no debt, no assets. Employment history series of domestic and low-wage service jobs. Flawless record, no complaints. Highly recommended for punctuality and diligence. Education, high school diploma, via GED obtained 4 years ago. No college. Criminal record, none. Not even a parking ticket. Digital footprint, minimal. No active social media. Name appears on a few public housing lottery lists from 4 to 5 years ago. The report concluded with a personal note from Finn Jeffrey. This is clean. Too clean. It's like she fell off the map and reappeared 5 years ago as a fully formed, law-abiding, low-income worker. No family connections pinging my databases. No childhood friends. No digital breadcrumbs before that point. She either lived a completely analog life in a commune, or this identity is a construct. I'll need more time to dig deeper, to go past the digital and into physical records. Let me know if you want me to proceed. This gets more expensive. Jeffrey stared at the screen, a cold knot forming in his gut. A construct. The word echoed his own suspicions. People didn't just appear out of nowhere. Everyone had a past, a history, a web of connections. Imani Washington's history began abruptly at age 24. It was a blank slate. His instinct, honed by years of sniffing out corporate fraud, screamed that something was wrong. But his heart, a muscle he rarely exercised, was in turmoil. Every day, Leo showed new signs of progress. He had started to hum the lullaby himself, a soft, breathy imitation of Imani's tune. He had even spoken a word. Just one. Imani had been helping him with his shoes, and he had looked at her and whispered, "Money." It was a fragment, a shadow of her name, but it was the first word he had uttered in years. The moment relayed to Geoffrey by a tearful Mrs. Davenport had shaken him to his core. He was caught in an impossible bind. The man who had brought unprecedented calm and connection into his son's life was a phantom, an enigma, with a manufactured past. To expose her could be to shatter the fragile peace she had built. To ignore it felt like an unacceptable risk. He decided on a direct but cautious approach. That evening he found Imani in the kitchen, carefully cutting the crusts off a sandwich for Leo's lunch the next day. The domestic scene was so normal it felt surreal. "Imani," he began, keeping his voice level, "I'd like to ask you a few questions." She turned her expression unreadable. "Of course, Mr. Pembroke." "You've been wonderful with Leo," he said, deciding to start with the truth. "The change in him is remarkable. I'm very grateful." "He's a wonderful boy," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. "He just needs to feel safe." "The way you calm him," Geoffrey pressed gently. "The humming. It's a specific tune. Is it a song you know?" For the first time, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a guarded, painful emotion. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "It's just something I learned a long time ago," she said, her voice quiet. "Something my mother used to hum." "And your family? You're from Oregon, the agency file says." He was probing, watching for any inconsistency. She turned back to the sandwich, her movements precise. "I don't have any family anymore, sir. It's just me." Her answers were simple, believable, and told him absolutely nothing. But her posture, the slight tensing of her shoulders, betrayed a defensiveness that wasn't there before. He felt he was close to a nerve. His eyes scanned her, looking for any clue. He saw it then. A thin silver chain around her neck, usually hidden by the collar of her uniform, was visible. On it hung a small, tarnished silver locket, oval-shaped and clearly very old. It seemed out of place with her simple, almost ascetic life. "That's a lovely locket," he remarked, his tone casual. She instinctively reached up her hand, closing around it, concealing it from his view. "A keepsake," she said, her voice now clipped. "Is there anything else, Mr. Pembroke?" The wall was back up, higher and stronger than before. He had pushed too far. "No, Imani, that's all, thank you." He retreated to his office, the conversation replaying in his mind. "I don't have any family anymore." The words sounded, practiced, rehearsed. The locket was the key. He was sure of it. An object with history, with sentiment. It was the one thing about her that didn't feel manufactured. He called Finn. "Keep digging," he said, his voice hard. "I don't care what it costs. I want to know where that name came from. And I want to know what she was before she was Imani Washington." And Finn. "Focus on Portland 5 or 6 years ago. Look for missing person's name. Changes anything that involves a young black woman who might have had a reason to disappear." As he hung up, he felt a pang of guilt. He was investigating the one person who had helped his son. But the mystery of her was a puzzle he couldn't leave unsolved. The well-being of his son and the security of his fortress depended on it. Finn O'Connell worked with the silent, relentless precision of a predator. While his digital searches had hit a wall, the mandate to go physical opened up a new world of possibilities. He dispatched operatives to courthouses, to municipal archives, to dusty records rooms in Portland and the surrounding counties. They were looking for a ghost, a whisper in the bureaucracy. For 2 weeks the trail was cold. Jeffrey lived in a state of suspended anxiety. On the surface, life was better than it had been in years. The estate was calm. Leo was not just stable, he was blooming. He had started using a few more words. Shug cup. Out. All spoken in a soft whisper, usually directed at Imani. He would even initiate physical contact, occasionally resting his head on her lap as she hummed her lullaby. To anyone else, it would have looked like a miracle. To Jeffrey, it felt like the prelude to a storm. He found himself watching Imani, not just as a caregiver, but as a suspect, analyzing her every move, her every word, for a crack in her carefully constructed facade. The break came on a Tuesday morning. Jeffrey was in a video conference with his board, debating the acquisition of a smaller tech firm, when a priority notification flashed on his screen. It was an email from Finn. The subject, Urgent Identity Confirmed. Jeffrey abruptly ended the meeting, citing a family emergency. His hands trembled slightly as he clicked open the encrypted file. It contained a single scanned document and a short explosive text from Finn. Jeffrey, we found her. It was a legal name change filed 6 years ago in Multnomah County, Oregon. Sealed, but a friendly clerk owed me a big favor. Before she was Imani Washington, she was Imani Adebayo. I ran that name, and I found the connection. You're not going to believe this. Check the attachment. Jeffrey's blood ran cold. Adebayo. The name struck him like a physical blow, a ghost from a past he had systematically walled off. With a sense of mounting dread, he opened the attached file. It was a birth certificate. It belonged to Imani Adebayo. Date of birth, May 12th, 1996. Place of birth, London, England. Father's name, Joseph Adebayo. Mother's name, Helen Adebayo. And then listed on the line just below was the name of her legally registered next of kin, her only sibling, Ilara Adebayo. Jeffrey shot to his feet, knocking his chair over. It crashed to the marble floor, the sound echoing in the silent office. He stared at the name, his mind refusing to compute. Ilara, his late wife, the vibrant, passionate, beautiful woman he had met in London, swept off her feet and brought back to America. The woman who had given him Leo. The woman who had died on a rain-slicked highway 4 years ago. Imani Washington was not his maid. She was not his son's caregiver. She was his sister-in-law, the pieces slammed into place with dizzying, sickening force, the lullaby. It wasn't just some random tune. It was their tune. Ilara used to hum it softly when she was painting, or when she was rocking a newborn Leo to sleep. He hadn't consciously remembered it until now, but hearing it from Imani's lips had stirred something deep in Leo's subconscious, a primal memory of his mother's comfort. The immediate connection. The way she looked at Leo with an intensity that went beyond professional care, it was love. It was fierce, protective, familial love. The fabricated identity, the ghost in the system. She had erased herself, created a new persona, all to get inside his house. Why, the question hammered at him. His mind reeled back to his life with Ilara. He had loved her, but his work had always been a jealous mistress. He remembered her talking about her family in London, a family that had disapproved of her marrying a wealthy secular American. Her father, a traditional Nigerian pastor, had been particularly against it. Ilara had told him they had disowned her, that they had cut off all contact. He had accepted her story, too busy building his empire to question it, to try and bridge the gap. After her death, he had sent a formal sterile notification to an old address in London. He never received a reply. He had assumed they didn't care. He had been wrong. They had cared. At least one of them had. Her younger sister. He felt a wave of nausea. This woman, this complete stranger he had been investigating, who he had suspected of being a grifter, was family. She was the only living blood relative of his wife, and he had been treating her like a servant. The shame was a physical weight, but the shame was quickly followed by a cold, sharp anger. This was a deception of the highest order. She had lied her way into his home, into his son's life. He didn't know her motives. Was it for money revenge? To take Leo away from him, he strode out of his office, his mind a whirlwind of confusion, betrayal, and a strange, unfamiliar guilt. He found her in the garden with Leo. The sun was shining, and they were sitting in the grass, watching a ladybug crawl up a blade of grass. Leo was completely engrossed, a look of placid concentration on his face. It was an image of pure innocence, an innocence built on an intricate lie. He stopped at the edge of the patio, his shadow falling over them. Imani looked up, her placid expression shifting slightly as she saw the look on his face. She knew. He could see it in her eyes. She knew the game was up. Imani Adebayo. He said the name, tasting foreign and bitter on his tongue. We need to talk. The name hung in the air between them, sharp and heavy as a guillotine's blade. Leo, sensing the sudden tension, flinched and looked from Jeffrey's stony face to Imani's. Her calm expression had finally shattered, replaced by a mixture of fear, defiance, and profound sadness. She gently squeezed Leo's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance before slowly rising to her feet. "Leo," she said softly, her voice miraculously steady. "Why don't you go inside with Mrs. Davenport for a snack? I'll be there in a minute." As if on cue, the head of household appeared at the doorway, having been summoned by a discreet text from Jeffrey moments before. Mrs. Davenport, ever the professional, gently guided a confused Leo indoors, leaving Jeffrey and Imani alone in the manicured garden, surrounded by silent, blooming roses. "How did you find out?" Imani asked, her arms wrapped around herself, as if bracing for a blow. "I have my resources," Jeffrey said, his voice clipped. "That's not the point. The point is the deception. You concocted a fake identity, lied on your application, and infiltrated my home and my family. I want to know why. Is this about money? Are you planning to sue for a piece of Ilara's estate?" A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Imani's lips. "Money? You think this is about your money? My God, you really don't know anything, do you?" Her sudden fire caught him off guard. "Then explain it to me." "Explain it!" She shot back, her voice trembling with years of pent-up anger and grief. "You want me to explain 4 years of silence, 4 years of unanswered letters and phone calls. My sister, my Ilara, moves across the world for you. Our father was difficult. He was rigid, and he couldn't understand her choices. But he didn't disown her. We didn't disown her. We loved her." She took a step closer, her eyes flashing. "She wrote to me every week. Long, beautiful letters about her new life, about her pregnancy, about Leo. She was so happy at first. But then the letters started to change. They became less frequent, shorter. She sounded isolated, lost. She wrote about how vast this house was, how empty, how you were always working, always in a meeting, always closing a deal. She called this place the Glass Fortress, a beautiful prison." Jeffrey flinched as if she'd slapped him. Ilara had never said those things to him. Imani continued, her voice cracking. "The last letter I got from her, she sounded scared. She said she wasn't feeling like herself, that she felt like she was disappearing. She asked me to come visit. I booked a flight. 2 days before I was due to leave, I got a sterile, formal email from your lawyer's office. We regret to inform you. Tragic accident. Not a call from you, not a personal word. Just a legal notice, as if she were a defunct subsidiary of your company. Shame, hot and searing, washed over Geoffrey. He remembered that time. He had been devastated, yes, but also overwhelmed. He had delegated the unpleasantries to his staff, burying his grief in the one thing he could control: his work. I tried to contact you. Imani choked out tears now streaming down her face. I flew here anyway. I came to this gate. Your security told me Mr. Pembroke was not seeing anyone and that I should leave the premises or I'd be arrested for trespassing. I called, I wrote, I begged for information. For a photograph of my nephew. For a chance to grieve with her husband. But you had locked yourself away in your fortress. To you, the Adebayo family was a loose end, a messy detail from a past life you wanted to close the books on. The accusation hit its mark. He had seen her family as an inconvenient complication to his clean, orderly life with Ilara. The police report said it was a single-car accident on a rainy night. She went on, her voice raw. Case closed. But I knew my sister. She was a careful driver. And I had her last letter. I knew something was wrong. I thought maybe you had something to do with it. What? Geoffrey was aghast. You thought I'd harm my own wife. I didn't know what to think, she cried. I was a 23-year-old girl alone, grieving, and a world away from home, being stonewalled by a billionaire's legal team. I imagined everything. Was she unhappy? Did you fight? Did she crash the car on purpose? Or was it just neglect? Were you so busy that you didn't see your wife was drowning in sadness right in front of you? That last question was the one that truly gutted him. Had he thought of her quietness in those final months, her waning interest in her art. He had attributed it to the exhaustion of new motherhood. He had bought her gifts, offered to fund a new gallery for her, throwing money at a problem he hadn't bothered to understand. So I made a plan, Imani said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice hardening with resolve. A desperate, crazy plan. If I couldn't get in the front gate as Ilara's sister, I would come in the service entrance as a nobody. It took me 2 years. 2 years of working dead-end jobs, saving every penny, legally changing my name, building a history that was clean enough to pass a background check, but poor enough to be believable for a maid's position. All of it was to get to Leo, to see him, to make sure he was okay. He is the last piece of my sister I have left in this world. She finally looked at him, her gaze stripped of all pretense. I came here expecting to find a monster. I came here looking for proof that you were responsible for her death. And what did you find? Geoffrey asked, his voice barely a whisper. I found something sadder, she said, her voice softening. I found a man who is just as lost as his son. A man who built a fortress to protect himself from feeling anything at all. You didn't kill her, Mr. Pembroke. I don't believe that anymore. But I believe your silence, your ambition, and this cold, empty house. I believe they broke her heart long before her car ever hit that tree. The truth of her words settled over him, dismantling the walls of his denial piece by piece. He wasn't a monster. He was worse. He was a man who had possessed something precious, and through sheer willful ignorance had let it slip through his fingers. The unbelievable thing wasn't that the maid had calmed his son. It was that she had come seeking a villain, and had instead unearthed a tragedy of his own making. The silence that followed Imani's raw, heart-wrenching confession was a living entity in the manicured garden. It was weighted with the ghosts of unspoken words, of unheard cries, for help, of a shared grief that had been allowed to fester in isolation for 4 agonizing years. Geoffrey stood motionless, the perfect blooming roses around him, seeming to mock the decay of his own life. The truth of her words, a man who is just as lost as his son, had pierced the final layer of his armor, leaving him exposed not just to her, but to himself. He looked at the vast glass walls of his house, and for the first time saw it as Ilara must have not as a symbol of success, but as the glittering cage Imani had described, a fortress designed to keep the world out, which had ended up imprisoning its inhabitants within. He finally moved, turning to face the woman who was his sister-in-law. Her anger had subsided, leaving behind the hollowed-out exhaustion of a long-fought battle finally ended. He saw the faint traces of Ilara in the shape of her eyes, in the determined set of her jaw. And he saw the profound pain he had personally caused her. "I am sorry," he began the words, feeling pitifully small, a child's apology for a cataclysmic failure. He forced himself to continue to give the apology the weight it deserved. "I'm sorry for not answering your calls. I'm sorry for turning you away at the gate. My grief made me a coward, and my cowardice made me cruel. I'm sorry for not seeing her, for not seeing Ilara's sadness. I was so obsessed with building a perfect life that I failed to notice the person I was building it for was falling apart." His voice broke on his late wife's name. It was the first time he had allowed himself to truly feel the crushing weight of his neglect. Imani listened, her arms still wrapped around herself, a fragile shield against a world that had offered her little softness. She had dreamed of this confrontation for years, rehearsed the righteous anger in her mind 1,000 times. But seeing this powerful man so utterly broken before her offered no triumph, only a shared, desolate sense of loss. "What happens now, Jeffrey?" she asked, her voice quiet, devoid of its earlier fire. "Do you call your lawyers? Have me arrested for fraud and trespassing. I lied. I deceived you. I broke the law to get in here." He looked toward the house to the window, where he could see the small silhouette of his son. Leo, the quiet, innocent center of this entire tangled web. Everything Imani had done, in all its calculated desperation, she had done for that little boy. Everything Jeffrey had failed to do had wounded him. In that moment, Jeffrey's path forward became starkly, terrifyingly clear. "No," he said, his voice firming with a resolve that felt entirely new. It wasn't the resolve of a CEO making a tough decision, but of a man choosing a different life. "I'm not going to call the police. I am going to ask you to stay. I am going to beg you to stay." He took a tentative step closer. "Please, Imani, don't leave. He needs you." "And I?" He swallowed his pride, the hardest thing he'd ever done. "I need you. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be the father he deserves. Please, stay. Not as a caregiver, not as an employee, but as his aunt, as our family." The offer, raw and vulnerable, hung in the air. Imani stared at him, her mind reeling. This was not the outcome she had ever envisioned. She had come for truth, perhaps for justice, but not for this. Not for an invitation to join the very life that had broken her sister's heart. "How do I know this is real?" She whispered the question full of doubt. "How do I know that you won't retreat back into your office the moment things get difficult? Ilara needed you, and you disappeared into your work. Leo needs you now. What will you do when the next billion-dollar deal comes along?" "That man is gone," Jeffrey said, and he knew with a certainty that resonated in his bones that it was true. "He died in this garden about 10 minutes ago. All that's left is a father who wants to learn how to know his own son. Please, give me a chance to prove it." The first days of this new arrangement were a minefield of awkwardness. Their first dinner together at the colossal mahogany table was a study in strained silence. Jeffrey, accustomed to business dinners, tried to fill the quiet with questions about market trends, only to be met with Imani's gentle, reproachful gaze. She would simply ask Leo, "Did you see the blue jay in the garden today?" steering the focus back to their small, shared world. The real change began the next morning. Jeffrey walked into his pristine home office with its bank of monitors and sweeping views and began to dismantle it. He unplugged the 4 monitors displaying global stock tickers. He took down the framed magazine covers featuring his face. He called his executive assistant. "Clear my schedule after 2 p.m., he ordered, permanently, and cancel the Singapore trip. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "So you heard me," he said, and hung up. He then took a small, colourful finger painting Leo had made with Imani and placed it in the centre of his vast, empty desk. It was his new bottom line. The greatest test came that weekend when Jeffrey suggested they finally go through Elara's belongings, which he had outsourced to a professional archiving company and stored in a sterile, climate-controlled unit. Walking into the cold, stark white room felt like entering a mausoleum. Box after box was labelled with impersonal codes. Together, he and Imani opened them. It was an excavation of a life. They found half-finished canvases, the vibrant colours a testament to the passion he had let fade. They found her journals. Imani, with Jeffrey's trembling permission, read some of the entries aloud. The early ones were filled with love and hope. Then the tone shifted. Jeffrey worked late again. Tonight one read, "This house is so big, my footsteps echo. I feel like an echo myself sometimes." Jeffrey sat on a cold metal stool and listened, each word a deserved blow against his soul. It was his penance. In the last box, they found a small collection of home video files on a hard drive. Imani plugged it into a laptop, and suddenly, the sterile room was filled with light and sound. It was Elara, vibrant, laughing, her hair catching the sun as she chased a giggling toddler Leo around their first, much smaller garden. The camera zoomed in on her as she scooped him up, rocking him, gently humming that familiar 5-note lullaby. Seeing her, hearing her so full of life, broke something open in both of them. Imani wept for the sister she had lost, and Jeffrey wept for the wife he had failed. They weren't a billionaire and his sister-in-law anymore. They were just 2 people bound by a shared love for a woman they both missed terribly. In that storage unit, surrounded by the ghost of Elara, they began to build a bridge. Leo, in his intuitive, silent way, seemed to sense the shift. He became the architect of their new family. One evening, as Jeffrey sat awkwardly on the floor trying to build a block tower, Leo took his hand. Then he took Imani's hand, and with surprising strength pulled them together, placing them one on top of the other in the center of the rug. He looked at their joined hands, then up at them, and made a soft, contented sound. The house itself began to breathe again. The cold marble was warmed by soft rugs. The echoing halls were filled with the sound of Imani's humming, Jeffrey's clumsy attempts to join in, and occasionally the whisper of Leo's voice saying a new word. The garden where the painful truth had been revealed became their project. Together, the 3 of them dug up the perfect ornamental roses and planted a messy, chaotic vegetable patch because Leo liked the feel of the dirt and the bright red of the tomatoes. There was no sudden, miraculous ending. Leo was still autistic. Grief was still a visitor that came in quiet moments. But the unbelievable thing had already happened. It wasn't a single event, but 1,000 tiny, deliberate acts of change. It was a father learning to measure his wealth not in stock points, but in the rare, breathtaking sound of his son's laughter. It was an aunt finding justice for her sister, not through revenge, but through nurturing the life she had left behind. It was a sterile house of glass and steel, finally, painstakingly being filled with the messy, beautiful and unbreakable stuff of a real home. The story of Jeffrey Leo and Imani is a powerful reminder that the greatest treasures in life are not the ones we can buy, but the ones we are brave enough to feel. It's a journey that started with suspicion and silence, and ended in the rebuilding of a family from the ashes of secrets and sorrow. It shows us that true connection isn't about grand gestures, but about the quiet patience of sitting on the floor, the courage to face painful truths, and the humility to say, "I'm sorry, please help me." This wasn't a story about a rich man and his maid. It was a story about a family finding its way home. If this story of unexpected love, profound forgiveness, and the true meaning of family touched your heart, please help us share it. Hit that like button to show your support. Click share to pass this powerful message on to someone else, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that explore the depths of the human heart. What part of this journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from you.